Homework accuracy is a different animal than homework completion. And I think after all of us think about it, we would realize that homework completion actually does have no bearing on content mastery, but there is more debate about homework accuracy. So in other words, if we were to grade the homework, look at each individual problem, then does that show content mastery? Well, it comes down to what is the purpose in you giving the homework assignment. Is your purpose to practice the skills? Do you want students to practice those skills that you've taught them in class, those mathematical skills that relate to the content mastery? Well, if it is practice, it's still formative. It's not summative. Because if it's practice, students need the freedom to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. In fact, some of the latest research out of Singapore from, I believe it's Manu Kapoor, is talking about the need for making mistakes and being able to learn through that process. It's called productive failure. And he talks about how ill-structured problems can lend itself to a productive failure type of environment, and that without those chances for productive failure, then we actually don't really learn. And so if we're going to practice, then we should expect students to come across some stumbling blocks. We should expect them to not get it perfect and then we should be training them how to deal with those situations so that they can push past it. And that is the very definition of formative. It's not summative. It's not going to summarize what their ultimate content mastery is. Instead, it's going to tell us where they're at, and then we know where they need to be, and it should give us a picture of how to get there. So that is formative in nature. So what are the consequences if students don't do this? If students don't do the practice? Well, nothing. Who cares? If they know what they're doing and they don't do the homework, great. Then they're still going to do fine on the summatives. If they don't know what they're doing on the content and they don't do the homework, well, the natural consequence is going to show up on the summative. What we need to start training students to do is to make good and right choices, and not have to dangle a grade in front of them to get them to do that. I mean, we don't give the kids a piece of candy every time they complete a homework assignment. Why should we give them points in the gradebook every time they complete a homework assignment? We would think it would be ridiculous to give them candy, but that's exactly what we're doing when we give them 5 points or 10 points on this homework when we want them to practice it. It's also teaching them that there's no value in practice unless it's got a direct product at the end of the candy or the points. And it's also teaching them that failure is bad because we're grading it and giving them a grade on it and saying you did not get this right, and therefore it's going in the grade book like that, when instead they need that chance to practice and have, again, productive failure. So instead what you can do is take the homework completion rates, and homework accuracy rates as well. I would say take both of them and write them on top of each major summative assessment that you give. So on top of a test or something like that, write the student's homework completion rate for the whole unit, write the student's homework accuracy rate for the whole unit on top, and then ask them, is there a correlation? Do you see something going on here? While it is outside of our experience because of the way we grew up in the test or the education environment that we grew up in, it doesn't mean that it has to be outside of the experience of students today to have homework where they don't get a grade for it, and that's perfectly fine. And in fact, I believe it's a better system. The other thing you can do is you can give a homework quiz at the end of class every day, or every other day, or whatever, and use that homework quiz as a formative grade. So that way you're not grading every single problem. This is a way that you can reduce the grade load on yourself so that you can get feedback to students more quickly. So when I grade accuracy, I grade only 4 problems that I think are representative of the skills I want students to have learned from that homework, and I do those about every other day. So maybe twice a week I have a homework accuracy grade, and then that's the one where I write down, if they have mistakes, if they're having problems with integers, if they're having problems with inverse operations, I'll write a note on that. And I also don't put a grade on top of it. I don't put a grade. If they got everything right, I'll say good job or something like that. And if something's wrong, I'll point that out and circle some things and say, hey, you need to look back at this step, or whatever. I'll give them some qualitative guidance so that they can improve their own learning from this point forward. All right, what was your purpose in giving the homework assignment? Was it to give teacher feedback like I just described? Well, that's still formative. That's not summative. And so it's not going to be part of a student's grade. Now, I still track homework accuracy. I still keep it in my grade book. I put a quantitative value in my grade book for it, but it's at a 0% category. So it's just data that I have, that students have, that parents have, that administration has, so that we can, again, determine where a student's at, what their progress has been, but it's not summative. It does not summarize their ultimate learning of the content standards. But if I am needing to give them feedback and then they don't do it, well, then they need to redo the homework so that I can give feedback. Because if it's important enough for me to assign in that and important enough for me to give that feedback to all those students, if I think that's important, then they need to redo the assignment. Now, for me, I can give feedback in other ways, and one of the main ways that I'm using homework accuracy is to make sure that students are doing my check, correct, and reflect self-regulation strategies. So that's really how I'm pushing the homework accuracy. So if they don't get the feedback from me, then I'm trying to train them to say, hey, you're not getting this valuable feedback. You're not getting the places where you need to be studying a little bit more, and that's having kind of a snowballing effect on the summative assessments. So I'm trying to get students to see how they can teach themselves and learn from the situations that they're in. So instead, like I said, don't write a grade on top of this, because if you write a grade on top, students just look at the grade and then they toss it up and throw it away. They never look at it again. Instead, anything that's written on there needs to be qualitative in nature instead of quantitative, so that way they're forced to read it instead of looking at a number and then giving themselves a value judgment based on that number and usually feeling bad about it and getting rid of it. So I'll put some qualitative feedback on there, and I know this is kind of ridiculous, but you could do it in a different color pen besides a red pen, and for whatever reason it helps them. So you could save your red pen for the summatives and use a different colored pen for the formatives. I myself think this is a little bit cheesy, but I believe it works. So whatever's best for the kids. What was the purpose of the homework? Was it to learn the content? Sometimes we give a homework assignment that's a kind of a discovery assignment where we expect students to dig into something they didn't already know, and we want to stretch their boundaries of their knowledge and their application. Well, if that's the case, then again, it's formative. This is what I would call maybe a learning task more than a homework assignment. This is not summative. It's not going to summarize their learning because they're just now learning it through discovery. So again, this homework is not going to be part of a student's grade. So the consequence of not doing it, well, they absolutely have to redo it. Because if we're giving it a discovery assignment, then this is the main learning tool that we're using. So they're going to have to redo it. Whether that means they come in over lunch, I have students come in and sit in over lunch with me. They'll stay after school or come in before school, come in during a study hall and get this done. But once they know that they have to do these types of things, then oftentimes they get done in the first place, because they'd rather have it done in the first place than miss time at their lunch table or something like that. So my suggestion here, give less homework problems, okay, but have what's assigned take more thought. Use some higher levels of Bloom's if this is the type of homework assignment you want to give, is to learn through it. It's almost a flipped classroom kind of approach, where the homework assignment is digging into the content, and also be less helpful. Okay, this forces the students to think for themselves. If you really want them to discover things, then you're going to have to not answer questions, because they're going to come to you and look for, well, what do I do here? What's the next step? What's the next step? When instead, keep in mind the purpose is for them to discover the content through this homework assignment. Now, keep in mind, still formative, not summative. Okay, what's the purpose of you giving homework? Maybe at the K through 5 level, maybe it's to learn time management and organization. Again, if that's your purpose, then it's a formative assessment. You're checking on their time management and organization skills. Super, super important, but not a direct indicator of content mastery of grade level standards. Okay, it's formative, it's not summative, it's not going to be part of a student's grade. I'd still track the data, keep track of it, but put it in a 0% category. So what happens if they don't do it? Well, if they don't do the homework, then in this case, if my purpose was to learn time management and organization, then I would say we need to create a homework completion plan with parents. Sit down with the parents and say, here's what we expect for the students at home. This would be a good way to improve their self-regulation skills, and it's going to stick with them the rest of their academic career and hopefully even into their actual career after they get out of school. And focus more on the time spent on task rather than the amount of homework that's completed. So you can ask parents to even keep track of this and just give them a little data chart that they can just fill out the number of minutes the student was working at home each night that week. Because again, the purpose here is to build up those time management and organization skills. It's not actually learning the math content per se, which is again why it's formative and not summative. Is it ever possible for homework to be summative? Well, maybe. But for homework to be summative, students have had to have a chance to have mastered the skills. So that means they've had to have time. They need time to practice, to fail, to learn, to correct, to revise before things get graded. And unfortunately, if students have taken all the time where they've corrected every single problem, they've revised every single problem, and you've walked them through that process together in class or something like that, then now it no longer has a value as a formative assessment, because now they've all got everything complete, and it also probably loses its value as a summative because you've walked them through that process yourself. So the best way I can think of to make homework accuracy summative is with kind of like a weekly quiz or an every other day quiz, kind of like I described earlier, where we would say, okay, by now I really have expected you to have mastered this content, and so I'm going to take some problems that are nearly identical to the homework, and I'm going to have you do them right here in class so I can see that you're the one doing it, not your parents, not your friends, not looking them up online, but so that I know that you understand how this homework works, and we can move forward from there. That would be about the only way I can think of to make homework summative. Otherwise, it really is formative and in progress. To take homework to that level, you're probably actually looking more at a quiz than a homework. All right, so let's go to another type of assessment here, a problem-solving activity. I would call problem-solving activity anything that has an extended response type situation where you've got multiple steps needed to solve something, there are multiple skills involved, and we're looking at the reasoning and justification. So the old ISAT extended response problems, some of the newer PARCC assessment questions where they're having to write out their thoughts, like a what why type chart. Those are what I would consider a problem-solving activity, among many others that could be learning tasks. So our question is this type of assessment formative or summative? Well, again, this depends on the purpose. Why are you doing the problem-solving activity? If you're exposing them to new applications of the content, if this is something new, it's a new way to apply things, a new situation in which the mathematics apply, it's probably formative because it's new. They've never seen this before. They've never had a chance to see what mastery in this particular context would look like. And not that we can show them every context in which mathematics can be applied, because there are too many, and most of them are over their heads. But we can. What I do with problem-solving activities, I'll take 1 week and we'll work through an activity kind of in groups or in class together, and we'll talk about it, we'll build it up, and then the next week we'll have one that is vaguely similar, so that they're having to still make some transference of knowledge on their own, so that I can see that they're actually applying it and not just memorizing what I did the previous week, but also that they understand kind of that the content can go in different directions. And so I would say a problem-solving activity like this could be both formative and summative, but if it's new material, it's probably formative. If it's demonstrating mastery of content through an application that is not necessarily new, that is not brand new content to them, then that's probably summative. So it depends on your purpose. You might have the same exact problem, and one time you give it to students 1 year and it's formative because it's more of a learning experience and we can look at how we did and learn from that, and then the next year you might hold it off and use it as a summative to demonstrate mastery of that content. So again, it comes back to your purpose. Next assessment type is a pop quiz. I'm going to define this as a summative assessment with no advanced notice. Um, are there pop football games? I mean, we don't have any, the NFL, we're just like, oh, you know what, we decided to move the Super Bowl to this weekend. Here you go. That doesn't happen. The pop quizzes and things like this, they're really kind of gotcha strategies. They're just things that we do to keep students off balance. And I would say they're just a little mean. Instead, I would give fair notice that there are going to be summative assessments coming up because we want them to develop and apply good study skills and study habits, through their self-regulation strategies. And to do that, they have to be aware of where things are so that they can use their time management skills to plan those things out. Now, this isn't to say that they shouldn't be ready to do this math whenever, but it is saying that they need a chance to again, learn from mistakes and plan for the future. So this is more of a long-term thing. Instead, what recent research has shown is the value of a practice quiz. That if you were to give just a quiz that looks a lot like an upcoming quiz, just by having students take this practice quiz, they're going to increase their achievement on the actual quiz when it gets there, because they've had practice retrieval, okay, which is helping the brain, the what are they, the dendrons, right, that will form and connect as they recall this information more often. They're making those connections physically within their brain, and so the practice quiz can help with that. And it also gives you a chance to provide feedback where you can say, you know what, if I would have graded this could have been wrong, because you're still missing this particular piece of the puzzle. So now you can take that, you can go back and study it and be ready for it before we hit a summative assessment. So I wouldn't do pop quiz, but practice quiz would be great. And again, you can do the 4-question quiz, just a quick one kind of at the beginning of class. Call it warm-up activity or bell work. I call it a mastery task. And what we do at the beginning of class is they'll have those 2, 3, or 4 questions. They'll work on it on their own so that I know it's them right there in class that is doing it, and I know that when I assess it, it'll be their level of understanding. And then we go over it as a whole class and they grade it themselves, and then I collect that data, and that tells me immediately right there at the beginning of class, how are we doing on this particular skill that we've been talking about for a day or two already. And then I can adjust my instruction right there on the fly based on what we see. And we do some error analysis on each of those problems. If you made this type of error, what's the problem with the reasoning? Okay, I saw a teacher who created a video called My Favorite No, an activity called My Favorite No, where she would collect student work and then she would pick out her favorite problem that a student got wrong, and she would call it her favorite no, and had it up on the boards or projected it up so that students could see it and they would talk about it and find where the errors in reasoning were, but she presented it in a positive light so that students could again learn from those mistakes and learn that it's okay to make mistakes. So that might be a way you could use kind of a quick practice quiz rather than a pop quiz. An actual quiz is what I would say is a shorter assessment designed to assess mastery skills over a small set of skills. So I give like a weekly quiz at the end of the week. What do I expect you to have completely mastered this week? This is stuff that we're really not going to go over again. We're not going to have further instruction on. We're moving ahead. But this is something that's going to come back up on the test. It's going to come back up on a quarter exam. It's going to come up on problem solving. It's going to come up in a project. And so the quiz is kind of my first line of summative assessments, where I can say, what do you know right now in this small chunk of time? And then that's my first touch point, which we will then reestablish more touch points along the road with other summative assessments to try and get up to those 10 assessment questions that we need per skill to really have a good picture of what's going on. So what's your purpose? Is your purpose to establish reliability? Then yeah, that's summative, okay? And that's how I use a quiz. If your purpose is to provide feedback about particular deficit skills before a culminating summative assessment, well, that's really more formative. So not to say that students can't learn from a quiz, but if you're providing that feedback to students for the purpose of them making changes, that implies that there's going to be some more instruction and some more time to learn. So almost all of my quizzes are summative because I'm giving them when I feel like we're done and ready to be done, with a few skills each week, that this is it. There's no more time for instruction. We're not going back. And if we are going back, then that's a remediation issue at this point, not still a learning issue. And of course, any summative you can use as a formative in that way, but we're not going to flip it around. We're not going to take something that we know is formative and use it as a summative, because we know that they're still in progress. So for me, the quizzes end up being summative. It is possible you could have a formative quiz. So, it could be a mixture of both. Pretests. There are two versions of pretest, and I think I've only got really a definition here of one of them. Um, One of the first definition of a pretest is maybe what we traditionally think of, which is pretest, post-test. So that's designed to show growth. Do you know the content already that we're getting ready to learn about, that we're getting ready to explore? The purpose of a pretest really is to differentiate for enrichment. Who already has this, and where are we going to go for enrichment? I think we would probably all agree that that's formative. So why are we doing that? That's formative. Um, and we're going to have those kids move ahead in the content. So that's really differentiation. Another version or definition of a pretest would actually be a prior knowledge test. A prior knowledge test is for remediation, where we say, okay, do you have the skills in place that you need to move forward into this new section? So that's looking back at prior content that they should have already gotten either at this grade level or in previous grade levels. And then we would use that for remediation purposes. That is also formative. We might use a pretest to identify student leaders so that we can promote mathematical discourse, help with groups. That's formative. That's not summative. Show growth, establish a baseline. That's formative. Most of us would all agree that pretests are formative. I believe the average scores on my pretests for growth, for differentiation, are somewhere around a 5% with the new Common Core standards. So, at that point, there's not a lot of need for differentiation, because all the students are kind of on the same page. And then the post-test is the flip side of this coin, which is a test designed to show mastery over a whole unit of study. And notice that if that is the purpose, then obviously it's going to be summative. So let me ask, each type here of test that you might give. Does a multiple choice test show mastery? And I would argue it does not. It shows good guessing. It may show some, general intuitiveness about mathematics, but it doesn't show mastery. You can have a student who guesses really, really well and a student who guesses really, really poorly, and they both know exactly the same thing. So I would hesitate to make any post-test a multiple choice. Short response, written or symbolic, so show your work. This to me seems to work a little bit better because we're actually getting at the heart of what we want to see, which is, can you go through this process? Do you have some procedural fluency? Extended response can help us with conceptual understanding and application. Do we know what we're doing and why we're doing it? Do we really understand this process? Can I point out some errors in reasoning? That I believe is going to show some mastery. And a PBA, performance-based assessment, or a project or something like that, that can definitely be an application level thing, but just be careful if it's a group test or if it's a group project and that you're using as your post test for a unit, then that's not showing individual content mastery. That's showing somebody's individual content mastery, but we don't know who. So that is not a valid assessment. That loses its validity at that point. Speaking of which, we could have a project or extended response items that have some sort of rubric with it. And I just wanted to point out that we want our rubrics to address the mastery of the standards if it's going to be a summative project. Now, if it's going to be formative, it doesn't have to be. If you're going to work in a group and build up some knowledge, then then that's fine. You know, use your rubric for whatever you need it for. But if it's going to be summative, it really has to relate to the math. So let me give you a bad rubric here. Here's a bad rubric. This is asking students to make a children's story about 3D shapes. So, middle school students would have to make this story. And here was a rubric that I found online that was held up as an exemplary rubric, that people should use rubrics like this. All right, so they get a presentation score. They get the requirements score, which is that they have all the shapes they're supposed to have, and a theme and story that flows. Neatness in construction is worth 3 times, that the book is well built and illustrated neatly and colored. And creativity is 3 times, well thought out, an original theme, and the project overall looks great there at the end. This is an absolutely ridiculous rubric. Nothing actually scores math. Okay, this is an art grade. This is not a math grade. I've had students who we used to do a scale model project, and I had a student who made ceramic teddy bears in the oven, and she had a big one and then she shrunk it down and made a smaller one as kind of her scale model. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful creation. However, she didn't do any mathematics at all, and I failed her. And mom called me and was in tears, and kid was in tears over this. And I said, I'm sorry, she didn't do any math. The project was about ratios and proportions, and I didn't see any work about ratios, any work about proportions, any work about scales or scale models. All she did was make a smaller teddy bear. And I told the mom, I said, this is an excellent art project. You should enter this into an art fair or something because it really is beautiful. And at that point, mom, was so happy that I had said that, and was thrilled with me. And I believe the student actually did end up entering it into an art fair. And so the perfect example of saying, hey, you didn't get the math, but that's okay. Look what you did do. You did do this art project, and it was amazing. Now you didn't do the math, and we got to go back and fix that, but it's okay. We're going to get there. And that was a chance for a student to experience failure and hopefully learn from it, but not feel marginalized or worth less as a human being because of it. I was able to establish other worth and other value because there are other valuable skills that those students bring to bear. So, art rubric here, bad. Here's what might be a better rubric, okay? In the 8th grade, we have to talk about volume of rounded objects, cylinders, cones, and spheres. Maybe I say, do you know the definitions? Do you know the formulas? Okay. Can you, and remember this is a children's storybook that they're writing. In your storybook that you're writing for these kids, do you give an example of finding the volume? And does it make sense in the context of the story? So notice that that's getting at their application level of finding volume. And to what degree of mathematical precision are you using? And that's, of course, one of our math practice standards in Common Core. Are you using 3.14 as pi? Are you rounding it to 2 decimal places like we discussed? Is that enough? Can you work backwards to solve other problems like find the radius or the height? And can you give a context for this? So adding all that up for this rubric, that's 50 points. I multiply it by 2 and I got an easy percent out of 100. And everything on this rubric is based on content standards at the grade level. And then now I'm not grading an art project, I'm grading a math project for an individual student. Again, not that art doesn't have value, but our job is to say how well do you understand these mathematical skills and concepts. All right, so what I would ask you to do at this point is think about all these different types of assessments and spend some time reflecting on them on your own. What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of each one of these? And I've got a sheet of paper that you can download over here in the resources section that will help you go through that and just give you a place to jot those notes. So take some time to do that, and then we're going to head into the next part of assessment.